Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu and with me is Aditi Lumba bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh asserts India is well equipped to deal with all threats and challenges to sovereignty and territorial integrity. Iraq descends into political crisis as protesters storm presidential palace. India reiterates continued commitment to provide humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. Torrential rain and flood batters normal life in many parts of India. In badminton, India's shuttler H.S. Pranoy reaches second round in the Japan Open. And in cricket, Afghanistan chase a target of 127 runs against Bangladesh in the Asia Cup. Defence Minister of India Rajnath Singh asserted that India has been transformed into a strong, confident and self-reliant nation fully equipped to deal with all kinds of threats and challenges under the current leadership. Mr. Singh asserted that India is never the aggressor, but it is capable of defending the sovereignty, unity and integrity of the nation. Addressing a function in Udaipur, the minister said that the steps taken by the government in the last 8 years have injected new confidence into the armed forces. He said India's armed forces carried out surgical strikes in 2016 and Balakot airstrikes in 2019, displaying tremendous might. He added that it was proof that India's military prowess is no less than any other country. Mr. Singh assured the nation that the armed forces are deployed with full readiness to protect the people from anti-India elements. The minister listed a number of steps taken by the Ministry of Defence to promote Atmanirbharta or self-reliance in defence, including the issuance of 3 positive indigenization lists of 310 items and earmarking 68% of the capital procurement budget for the domestic industry in the Union Budget 2022-23. He remarked that foreign companies are being encouraged to manufacture in India under the Make in India, Make for the World vision to strengthen the domestic defence industry. In the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, 3 terrorists affiliated with the proscribed Lashkar-e-Toiba terror outfit were killed in a gunfight that broke out between terrorists and security forces at Nagbal village in South Kashmir's Shopian district Tuesday evening. According to police sources, a joint team of police, Army and Central Reserve Police Force, after receiving intelligence input about the presence of terrorists, launched a search operation in the area. As the joint team of forces intensified searches towards the suspected spot, the hiding terrorists fired upon the party, which was retaliated, thus triggering an encounter that resulted in the killing of 3 LET terrorists.
Meanwhile, External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. Jaishankar, has reiterated that the state of the border will determine the relationship between India and China. Dr. Jaishankar's remark came in the backdrop of the military standoff between India and China. Addressing an event in New Delhi on Monday, Dr. Jaishankar said, "The future of Asia depends on the development of India-China relations." He underlined that to bring the ties between the two countries on a positive trajectory and remain sustainable, they must be based on the 3 mutual sensitivity, mutual respect and mutual interest. The External Affairs Minister said sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected and initiatives that impact the region must be consultative, not unilateral. He said connectivity should be transparent, viable and market-based. He added that the development agenda also needs to be broad-based and reflect the global consensus rather than individual national objectives. President of the UN General Assembly and Foreign Minister of Maldives, Abdullah Shahid, has said that people-to-people ties and key agreements make India-Maldives relations outstanding. In an interview with a news agency, Mr. Shahid said the number of projects that have been going on and agreements that have been signed in the last few years have been outstanding. He said the Maldives-India relationship is at its highest point in their bilateral history. He said Prime Minister Modi attended the swearing-in ceremony of President Ibrahim Mohamed Solih, and later the Maldives President also visited Delhi. Calling for reforms in UN governance, Mr. Shahid said that the Security Council must reflect the reality of geopolitics of the current world order. The UNGA president termed India as the world's pharmacy and said that New Delhi has reached not only the neighbouring countries but as far as the Latin America and the Pacific and has shown its face of compassion.
In Iraq, at least 20 people have been killed when heavy clashes erupted in the capital Baghdad on Tuesday. Government officials said that dozens more were injured after protesters loyal to Muqtada al-Sadr stormed the presidential palace. According to media reports, street fighting erupted overnight as fighters exchanged gunfire and tracer rounds illuminated the night sky in some of the worst violence to hit the Iraqi capital in recent years. The violence was sparked after Mr. Sadr announced his retirement from politics. Iraq's caretaker Prime Minister has called for calm and the military has declared a nationwide curfew after unrest in several other cities. A spokesperson for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for immediate steps to de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, Iran has closed its air and land borders with Iraq as fighting between rival Iraqi forces raged for a second day on Tuesday. Iranian state television cited unrest and curfew in Iraqi cities as the reason for the border closures. It also urged Iranians not to go to Iraq. The decision came as millions of Iranians were preparing to visit Iraq for the annual pilgrimage to Shia sites. Kuwait also urged its citizens to leave the neighboring country. India has dispatched over 40,000 metric tons of wheat to Afghanistan so far. In her remarks during the United Nations Security Council meeting on Afghanistan, India's permanent representative to the UN, Ruchira Kamboj, said India has dispatched several shipments of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, including 32 tons of medical assistance. She added that the country has signed an agreement with the UN World Food Programme to ensure a fair and just distribution of its wheat assistance in Afghanistan. An Indian technical team has also been deployed at the Indian Embassy in Kabul to closely monitor and coordinate the efforts of various stakeholders for the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance and the continuation of India's engagement with the Afghan people.
The southwest monsoon has intensified and disrupted normal life in many parts of India. In Uttar Pradesh, many districts are reeling from the flood. The release of water and heavy rain in the catchment area of major rivers has worsened the flood situation in many parts of the northern state. The local administration has been asked to expedite the relief work. A report.
Deputy Chief Minister Keshav Prasad Maurya visited Prayagraj district where many low-lying areas are submerged in the water of Ganga and Yamuna rivers. He reviewed the relief and rescue operation and asked the officials to help every citizen who is stuck in the flood waters. Varanasi district is also facing the fury of flood where Ganga river is in its spate and all the famous ghats are submerged in flood water. Water of Ganga river has reached till the stairs of Kashi Vishwanath corridor and the river is flowing 1 meter above the danger mark in the city. Union Minister and MP from the neighboring Chandauli district, Dr. Mahendranath Pandey visited the flood affected areas of the city and reviewed the rescue and relief operation. Jal Shakti Mantri of the state, Swatantra Dev Singh, also conducted survey in Bundelkhand region. Betwa, Ken, Yamuna and Chambal rivers are wreaking havoc in the low-lying areas and many villages are marooned. Sushil Chandra Tiwari, AIR News, Lucknow.
The southwest monsoon is very active in the southern Indian state of Karnataka. Maddur in Mandi district recorded very heavy rainfall of 14 centimeters, followed by 13 centimeters in Chitradurga and Tumkuru and 12 centimeters in Bengaluru rural districts. The meteorological department forecast says that rain or thunder showers are very likely to occur at most places over the state. Heavy rains battered several districts of Kerala, Ernakulam, Kottayam, Alappuzha and Patnamthitta districts. The meteorological department said an orange alert has been issued in the districts of Patnamthitta, Alappuzha, Kottayam, Ernakulam, Idukki and Thrissur, indicating the possibility of heavy to very heavy rainfall. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, unprecedented flash floods caused by the monsoon rains have killed more than 1,100 people and affected more than 33 million people. The Pakistan government has also decided to establish a national flood response and coordination center to cope with the situation of floods in the country and rehabilitation of flood-affected people. On Monday, Pakistan received a $1.1 billion bailout package from the International Monetary Fund.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on India's role in the United Nations and India's quest for UN reforms. In conversation are former diplomat Anil Badwa and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, a journalist.
The United Nations General Assembly President Abdullah Shahid, who paid a two-day visit to India on August 28th and 29th, met with senior leaders of the country, including Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, and Foreign Secretary Vinay Kwatra. During his visit, Mr. Shahid acknowledged the very important role played by India at the United Nations and, in fact, on Monday described India as a source of pride, not only for South Asia, but for all peace-loving democracies. While acknowledging the pivotal role that India had played, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent recovery phase, Mr. Shahid, who is also the Foreign Minister of the Maldives, underscored that India had proven to be the pharmacy of the world and had assisted many countries even in the most remote parts of the globe. The visit of Mr. Shahid focused on the ongoing issues at the General Assembly and India's overall engagement with the United Nations. Ambassador Anil Badwa joins us this evening to discuss the importance of Mr. Shahid's visit and the pivotal role of India at the United Nations. Good evening, Anil.
Good evening.
Why is this visit of the outgoing President of the UN General Assembly an important one?
What has happened during this past year under Abdullah Shahid's presidency is that India has also been a member of the UN Security Council and has been acknowledging its three priorities full force, which is peacekeeping, maritime security, and counterterrorism at the United Nations Security Council. The fact that his tenure has been coinciding with India's participation in the UN Security Council, and the fact that he comes from Maldives, which is our important neighbor, and so thought it fitting that this would be a good finale to his end of tenure, which is soon coming to an end, as you said. He is quite impressed that India has contributed a lot during his presidency. And this is reflected in what you said about the India being the source of pride, not only for South Asia, but for all peace-loving democracies. Also, the contribution that India made during this period to assist several countries around the world with vaccines. And again, the cooperation that India has extended to key initiatives which he took during his tenure, basically 5 of them, in all of which India has supported his presidency.
So, Mr. Shahid has called his tenure as the year of hope, as it were, over the past year. And in those talks that he held with External Affairs Minister Jaishankar yesterday, Mr. Shahid said that they covered a range of key issues, including cooperation at the United Nations, as you just mentioned. In fact, over the past year, Mr. Shahid has himself emerged as an important player in international diplomacy, as his tenure has seen the role of the UN General Assembly enhanced somewhat, particularly where the Security Council was really unable to act decisively on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And for the first time in decades, the Assembly met to consider the issue under the format of the Uniting for Peace resolution, a provision for the UN General Assembly to take up issues on which the Council is unable to act. So that was something on which India also collaborated fairly substantially with Mr. Shahid. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You rightly pointed out that the United Nations Security Council is the UN's main executive body with the primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. But how over the past year or even before that, for the previous few years, so essentially the United Nations Security Council has become a prisoner of its own system, so to speak, and the reforms of the United Nations Security Council, along with the general reforms that India has been pushing for in the United Nations, have not come about. And therefore, the importance of the General Assembly becomes much more than in the past. Of course, it can only make non-binding recommendations, but at the same time, it can, by taking decisions with consensus and with full force, put pressure on the United Nations Security Council and the UN in general to act. So that's why the importance of the United Nations General Assembly under the presidency of Abdullah Shahid has been enhanced during this period.
How would you say Mr. Shahid has been able to tackle it? Because India has also helped him out by providing even staff for his presidency and having supported him throughout. And what were the areas in which the two countries, I mean, India particularly collaborated with him and his initiatives to enhance the functioning of the United Nations General Assembly this past year?
So I think under his presidency, the United Nations General Assembly took up a number of issues which are transnational in character. So it's just the issues of terrorism or proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. But he focused on the pandemic situation, on the climate, and on poverty and cybersecurity. Now, these are issues that cut across the continents, and a number of countries united together on these issues. And of course, the United Nations General Assembly is the main representative of the multilateral world order. So therefore, it was happy to be seized of these global issues. It's not really been given a chance to come in the limelight in the past. And while the reform talk of the United Nations has been ongoing for some years now, they've not approached to a text-based negotiations, as we all know, and therefore bring about more transparency to the institution and to enhance its credibility. This was one role that the United Nations General Assembly was able to do this year, bring to the fore issues that should have been frankly tackled by the United Nations Security Council.
So, in terms of among the things that Mr. Shahid said yesterday in his tweets was that they discussed not only the achievements of the 76th session, but also the importance of multilateralism. Now, India has always been a very strong advocate for multilateralism in the global context and has tried to play a fairly significant and constructive role, having the best of relations with all countries. So, in this particular context, what do you think these talks on multilateralism would have been focused on? Just the reform of the United Nations or beyond that?
I think it went beyond that because obviously the reform of the United Nations Security Council has been at the focus as far as India is concerned, but India is also very much concerned as to how the multilateral institutions and of the United Nations system and starts from bodies like the WHO, for instance. Yes. India has been highlighting that there is a need to bring about a change in the way international institutions and international bodies and the UN system in general is working at the current moment because they are falling short of their duty. And of course, we know that UN and new multilateralism has been talked about quite a bit in the recent past, especially in the developing world. Because when the UN was set up 75 years ago with the main aim of maintaining peace and security, it was faced with different kinds of challenges. And now the problems are different, the realities are different, the current humanitarian and economic losses. So there are acute challenges now pertaining to the multilateral UN system, and it needs to be more responsive, and it can only be more responsive if there are reforms which are brought about in the UN in order to strengthen its effectiveness as a multilateral organization and bring about more transparency to the institution so that it can enhance its credibility.
India's tenure, this non-permanent tenure, 2-year tenure at the UN Security Council is going to be ending in December. And India has played a fairly pivotal role in trying to pilot some very, very critical issues through the Security Council. But issues like terrorism have come to the fore and remain at the fore, actually. What kind of multilateralism are we actually looking at? India has been pushing so hard for so many years to even get the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism adopted. Even that hasn't happened in so many years. What is the United Nations supposed to actually be doing at this point, given all of these challenges?
So there are specific reasons for what you just said. I think the challenges for the multilateral system in present times are quite a few. I'd just like to name some of them and discuss. First of all, there's rise of a new Cold War today. Second issue is that we have a divided West itself. Despite enduring post-war alliances, there's a growing divergence between the United Nations and its European partners. Third is the ineffectiveness in general of the United Nations, because United Nations has been unable to respond effectively to, for example, the once-in-a-century global crisis triggered by the coronavirus. And at the National Security Council, we've seen permanent members led by China, for example, blocking a discussion on the origin and sources of the coronavirus crisis. Then the United States out of the World Health Organization as far as effective multilateralism is concerned. And that is the crying need for UN reform, because there's a defunct United Nations Security Council. The main executive has the primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. But when you have frequent use of the veto powers by the United Nations Security Council, 5 permanent members, it has disastrous consequences for countries around the world. It does not affect the distribution of military or economic power today, nor the geographical. So the structure of this 15-member Security Council ought to be more democratic and representative. And then, of course, we need also General Assembly reforms. We just talked about the role that the General Assembly has played over the last year, but itself, General Assembly now, because it can only make non-binding recommendations, it is ineffective. And if it is given more teeth, for example, last reason which I would quote is actually the UN's financial crisis, because UN has a lot to do, but it has too little money, as it is in a financial crisis due to the unwillingness of many members to pay their contributions on time. So as long as the UN budget remains tightly constrained, it cannot become effective. And also, along with this, we have a very toothless UN peacekeeping operation, because there is need to include more personnel there, carry out structural reforms for UN peacekeeping operations also.
So what is India's focus likely to be on this forthcoming session at the United Nations? And what about the next General Assembly session?
I think at the beginning of its membership of the United Nations Security Council were peacekeeping, security, and counterterrorism. In every theme that in every debate that India takes part, it tries to focus on these 3 issues, because it is seen now as a net security provider, especially in the Indian Ocean region, but also because it sees a threat for itself from a rising China from the seas around it. So therefore, this will safeguard the common prosperity and security interests, not only of India, but also of its neighbors. Then counterterrorism is a national priority. We've seen in the past how cross-border terrorism has been affecting India's natural progress and economic development because of diverse resources. So we firmly oppose terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. There is a treaty on the table which India has tabled, but of course there are differences around the whole theme of how to tackle this issue. And third issue, which we've laid emphasis on, the peacekeeping forces, because India has over 5,000 personnel today who are serving in a number of peacekeeping operations around the world. And India has to ensure that their safety and security are given the highest priority.
I think this, we can sort of carry on debating what the United Nations needs to do particularly. I mean, India will keep pushing for what it considers is important, but we've unfortunately run right out of time. Anil, thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Moving on to sports now. In Asia Cup cricket, Afghanistan beat Bangladesh by 7 wickets at Sharjah Cricket Stadium in Sharjah in Group B match. Chasing the victory target of 128 runs set by Bangladesh, Afghanistan made 131 in 18.3 overs for the loss of 3 wickets. In badminton, India's shuttler H.S. Pranoy reached the second round of the Japan Open. He was leading 11-10 in the first game when his opponent Angus Enka-Long withdrew. He will face world champion Loh Keen Yew of Singapore next. A report from the business desk.
At the stock markets, the Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange zoomed 1,564 points or 2.7% to close at 59,537 today. The Nifty at the National Stock Exchange shot up 446 points or 2.6% to 17,759. At global stock markets, Asian markets ended mixed. So Japan's Nikkei index climbed 1.1%, South Korea's Kospi index advanced 1%, and Singapore's Straits Times index rose 0.
All India Radio is celebrating 75 years of freedom with the series Azad Bharat Ki Baat Akashvani ke saath. It showcases the journey of India since independence in various walks of life through the storytelling of All India Radio. In today's Potpourri segment, we bring you the story of the dark days of emergency in India.
In the year 1975, in a significant political development, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's win in the 1971 Rai Bareli parliamentary elections came under scrutiny. Socialist leader Raj Narayan, who had contested against her, filed a petition in the Allahabad High Court accusing Mrs. Gandhi of having won the election through corrupt practices and misuse of government machinery. On the 12th June 1975, Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha declared Indira's election as null and void. He also barred her from contesting an election for 6 years, but gave the Congress 20 days to find a replacement Prime Minister. Mrs. Gandhi appealed against the verdict in the Supreme Court. On the 24th June 1975, the Apex Court granted a conditional stay, but ordered her not to oversee any parliamentary proceedings. On the 25th June 1975, President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed declared national emergency by invoking Article 352 of the Indian Constitution for maintaining national security amid internal disturbance. On June 26, from the All India Radio studios, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi said, "The President has proclaimed emergency. There is nothing to panic about."
भाइयों और बहनों, राष्ट्रपति जी ने आपातकाल की घोषणा की है।
This announcement by then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi hurled India into the darkest period of her democratic history.
The period of emergency lasted for around 21 months. Starting from midnight of 25th June 1975 till its withdrawal on the 21st March 1977. During this time, restrictions were imposed on the fundamental rights of the citizens as well as censorship of the press. Lok Nayak Jayaprakash Narayan started a movement against the autocracy.
चाहे वो प्रधानमंत्री हो, मुख्यमंत्री हो, विरोधी पक्ष के नेता हो, कोई भी हो, ऐसा लगता है कि लोग असहाय हैं इस परिस्थिति में। किस परिस्थिति में? ये सारा भ्रष्टाचार फैला हुआ है, जिस भ्रष्टाचार के कारण इन कानूनों का कार्यान्वयन नहीं हो रहा है, अमल में नहीं लाया जा रहा है। लाए जा रहे हैं कानून और लाए भी जा रहे हैं तो गलत तरीके से लाए जा रहे हैं।
Those who opposed the decision of the government were arrested. This period is regarded as one of the darkest days in the history of democracy in India. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was in the forefront opposing the emergency.
अनुशासन के नाम पर अनुशासन का खून भंग कर दिया संघ को। कैसा चढ़ा जुनून, कैसा चढ़ा जुनून। मत पूजा प्रतिबंधित, कुटिल कर रहे केशव कुल की कीर्ति कलंकित। कह दी कविराय तोड़ कानूनी कारा, गूंजेगा भारत माता की जय का नारा।
Once the emergency was lifted on the 21st March 1977, the country witnessed fresh elections in which the Congress party lost and the Janata Party came to power.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh asserts India is well equipped to deal with all threats and challenges to sovereignty and territorial integrity. Iraq descends into political crisis as protesters storm presidential palace. India reiterates continued commitment to provide humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. Torrential rain and flood batters normal life in many parts of India. In badminton, India's shuttler HS Pranoy reaches second round in the Japan Open. And in cricket, Afghanistan beats Bangladesh by 7 wickets in the Asia Cup. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.